We'll discuss today how, after Copernicus, the sciences of the heavens changed the way we perceive the world, and how groundbreaking astronomical discoveries and concepts were reflected in culture, literature, and arts. And it is my pleasure to welcome our distinguished guests. Professor Pamela Gossin is a professor of the history of science and literature in the Interdisciplinary School of Arts, Humanities, and Technology at the University of Texas, Dallas. Her doctoral research project at the University of Wisconsin-Madison was titled Poetic Resolutions of Scientific Revolutions, Astronomy and the Literary Imaginations of Donne, Swift, and Hardy. Her other publications include Thomas Hardy's novel Universe, Astronomy, Cosmology, and Gender in the Post-Darwinian World, and an Encyclopedia of Literature and Science. And Professor Ovanes Akopian, who is Andrew Mellon Fellow at Villa Itati, the Harvard University Center for Italian Renaissance Studies, and very soon, a Marie Skłodowska-Curie Fellow at Ca' Foscari University in Venice. He is the author of Giovanni Pico della Mirandola's Disputationes adversus Astrologiam Divinatricem and its Reception, published by Brill in 2021, and the editor or co-editor of 4 collections of essays. His second monograph, provisionally titled Explaining Natural Disasters in Early Modern Europe, Science, Politics, Rhetoric, is under contract with Johns Hopkins University Press. And we have agreed that after setting some background, our guests will have presentations, and after some discussion, we will take questions from the audience towards the end of our allocated time. So let me start perhaps with a brief quotation from an international bestseller, Yuval Harari's *Sapiens: A Brief History of Humankind*. Were, say, a Spanish peasant to have fallen asleep in AD 1000 and woken up 500 years later to the din of Columbus's sailors boarding the Niña Pinta and Santa Maria, the world would have seemed to him quite familiar. He would have felt at home. But had one of Columbus's sailors fallen into a similar slumber and woken up to the ringtone of a 21st century iPhone, he would have found himself in a world strange, beyond comprehension. If Harari makes that benchmark of 500 of the 16th century, could we just start, Professor Akopian, by saying a few words about what and if started to change about the way people understood the world after the Copernicus?
I may have some disappointing answers to that question, I'm afraid, because I suspect that in general there are certain patterns that they remain unchangeable over time. And I think for many people it doesn't really matter what revolves around what. I mean, you may know some basketball players in the 21st century who strongly believe that it's the other way around. So it's I suspect they have no idea who Ptolemy was, but they are sure that since they can't see them moving around the sun, hence that's the sun moving around our planet. So, but of course, what I'm going to present is concerned with learned knowledge. That's a different social strata and different actors involved in these processes. And I'd like to begin my talk by thanking the first of all Barbara and then the organizers for their extreme generosity, much more than I deserve. And I'll try to make it as entertaining as possible, and probably my talk will be pretty general, but I'm happy to answer any questions in detail afterwards. It uses a very funny symbol of the old paradigm, saying that Aristotle, so the symbol of the previous paradigm, drowned himself in the Strait of Erebus because he couldn't solve the mystery of the tides. This event was double-checked by several people, and it was fake news, as we know the term right now. But this anecdote continued to be reproduced over time in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century. 30 years earlier, another Jesuit scholar, Josip Bošković, probably the most famous Jesuit scholar of the 18th century, published this work, which was devoted explicitly to the origin of the tides, in which again he praised Newton, saying explicitly that the Newtonian system works exclusively within the Copernican theory. Of course, he came up with a certain excuse to say that it's not 100% clear how it actually works, but nonetheless, that was a strong endorsement through the image of Newton of the Copernican system. Very emblematic is that these texts are about the tides. You may know this very important treatise that discussed this phenomenon, and the question of the tides became a core argument of Galileo's Dialogo and his endorsement of Copernicanism. But what is also emblematic is that the most popular interpretation of the tides, the astrological one, was never mentioned in either Bošković or Garuli, and was mentioned only in hidden references in Galileo. My question is pretty simple. What happened to astronomy's sister discipline over time? Why did people in the 18th century refute it completely? And some people like Galileo in the early 17th century did refute it, but still left some room for astrological, let's say, possibility. I mean, they rejected, but it was still a valid discipline and legitimate discipline. Was it somehow connected to Copernicanism, to the endorsement of the heliocentrism, like in the case of the Jesuit scholars or Galileo, or there were other factors involved? And here I'm not the first one for sure to talk about such things. Here I mention some of the grand narratives of discussing these problems, and I don't pretend to correct any of those grand narratives because those people know much more than me on that matter. But I'm going to make a few suggestions and remarks as to how we can probably advance our understanding of the decline of astrology, mainly in the late 17th and early 18th centuries. What we know so far. So now the tricky part begins. We know that there was no immediate rejection of astrology following the Copernican revolution. That was the original point of some of the old narratives, grand narratives. But on the contrary, astrology continued to flourish in the 16th and 17th centuries. We know a lot of examples. The majority of the fathers of the scientific revolution practiced astrology. And even though it's not clear whether Copernicus was motivated by a need to reform astrology, we know that heliocentrism was used to reform not only astronomy, but also astrology. And I'm going to show a few examples of that, and then we can talk about whether it was a general trend or just, like minor episode in the history of knowledge. And the final element is that astrology was excluded from the realm of legitimate knowledge only in the early 18th century. It wasn't like that before that. It was a very well respected discipline. Here we have a very famous illustration from Pierre d'Ailly, who was a cardinal of the Catholic Church and a strong supporter of astrological practice in proving theological dogma. And by the time of Copernicus's life, astrology maintained this high position with a few, let's say, problems. The main problem was that by the 15th century, it became kind of obvious that the old paradigm had been embroiled in some discrepancies and required changes. First of all, mathematical changes. And of course, as we've heard, it was based on Ptolemy and Aristotle, so the Ptolemaic Aristotelian paradigm, and some attempts to reform it were made in the 15th century. Here we have Regiomontanus, the prince of astrologers. So here we have the king of astronomers and the prince of astrologers. Reforming was just one option. The other option was to reject completely. And here comes my dear friend Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, who rejects astrology on the basis of three things. First of all, it has a lot of discrepancies, hence no reasonable person can believe in it. Second, they appropriated our Aristotle, whom we should cleanse of astrological elements and return to a purified Aristotle. And astrology pretended that it been created by, by the ancients, by ancient patriarchs, etc., etc. That's all fake news once again. It's a modern, let's say, invention, mostly by Ptolemy and his followers, mostly from the first from the Islamic world and then of the Latin medieval world. And this text, the Disputations Against Judicial Astrology, was published, as we know, in the same year Copernicus came to Italy. But there were many problems with that text, and the main problem was concerned with this guy. I don't know whether you've seen him already or not, because I couldn't keep track. But Pico's work was published posthumously, and this guy appropriated its core to his own ideological ends. And that's why many people kind of thought that the Pico work had been a forgery, and preferred to argue not with Pico directly, on some occasion, but with Savonarola as the instigator of that work. But the most important thing is that it, in the end, unleashed a massive attack on astrology on several fronts. The most obvious one, also in the footsteps of Savonarola, was like the religious attack. Here we have, three examples, probably the most notable examples of that attack, including the bull Soli et Terrae, published in 1586 in Rome by Pope Sixtus V. There were mathematical solutions. Most of them were concerned with the Aristotelian Ptolemaic paradigm. So, as everyone knows, in the 16th century were just 10 examples, but I've now found the 11th of clear endorsement of Copernicus, or clear discussions at some length of Copernicus's system. Most of the reforms of astrology were produced within the old, let's say, paradigm. Among the new people, there were two instances, at least among the people who discussed Copernicus. The guy on the right reformed astrology within the Aristotelian paradigm, even though he discussed Copernicus's theory in some of his works. The guy on the left, Kepler, reformed astrology, but in a very intended to reform both astrology and astronomy, but also in a very metaphysical, let's say, way. He, in this regard, he is an exception to the rule. So it's not a mathematical reform exclusively. The 11th person I've recently discovered, is very emblematic in this regard, because he was a physician at the court of Maximilian II. He operated within the old tradition and refuted astrology following Pico's arguments, and yet wanted to reform it to make it more accessible and useful for certain elements of human operation. But he expressed a strong interest in the Copernican system. Here you have his graph describing it, and that's a very peculiar work. I'm happy to talk. I can talk like hours and hours about that, but here I'm just going to drop it, unfortunately, but happy to respond to any questions. In the end, from this little sketch, we can see that Copernicanism, or heliocentrism in general, didn't really affect any attempts to first reform astrology on a systematic level, and then didn't contribute to its exclusion from legitimate knowledge. I've identified four main, does it work? Yes. Four main elements. Of course, we can't ignore the religious component. In the end, like in the long run, it did affect the accessibility of astrological predictions and their reputation. But the other three were just as important as the first one. The second one is what I call the social change of the status of the mathematician and astronomer in the end. Because as you know, in the late 16th century, there was a growing number of chairs of mathematics, and the people who did the astronomy could do it separate from medicine or theology. So you have a certain niche to perform mathematical duties unrelated to other things. And also mathematicians found a way to make a living outside the court, hence horoscopes became, even though they remain very important courtier element, but that wasn't just obligatory. And here you have a diagram of, I'm slowly coming to an end. The third component that has been, I think, almost completely ignored in scholarship is the influence of the classical tradition. All those Noahs, Abraham, Hermes Trismegistus, etc., the fake fathers of astrology, all these ideas were ridiculed, first by Pico and then by his followers. But that required a very good command of ancient languages. And here I have a very funny example of a legendary fourth son of Noah, who was thought to have been the founder of astrology, but of course we have no idea about the existence of this Ionicus guy whatsoever. And the fourth one, which is requires a more systematic probably approach, is the overall decline of metaphysics in 17th and 18th century scholarship in Europe. Because astrology, for better or worse, was an integral part of a certain metaphysical worldview as a means of God's intervention into the terrestrial world. And here we have a certain shift of focus towards, for instance, the mind and other things. To conclude, I would say that, of course, Copernicus and his theory didn't play a major role in the overall decline of astrology. But I would say that his milieu, the environment to which he belonged, in one way or another, was largely responsible for this eventual exclusion of astrology from the realm of legitimate knowledge and practice. And even though we can't thank Copernicus directly for that, indirectly, he was a major figure in this process. So thank you very much. I hope a bit more than 15 minutes. My apologies.
Thank you very much indeed. And my question to Professor Gossen would be, After that, after the Copernican revolution, as we call it, could we name some next milestones in our perception, our change of worldviews, leading to your presentation as well, about how, let's say, our worldviews were fueled also by scientific ideas, our cultural output?
I think we're going to have a similar problem to what you described. I think you're going to have a similar problem to what you described, that at the popular level, where most of the people are living their lives beneath the skies, we're not going to see much change, just as we do today. Right now, I know after 30 years of teaching history of astronomy, I see no improvement in my students' understanding of what's really going on. So I think we do have a very, very broad problem with how to have a trickle-down effect from our kind of pyramid scheme of upper education down to a much broader base. So I think we're going to see that kind of reflected in what I'm going to talk about today, too. So, Dziękuję bardzo. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this special event. I'm honored to be here, and I've been asked to share. Has it gone over yet? Not yet.
So while we're waiting, perhaps, just a more general question again. Since you said about the popular views, and that's probably not something that was completely permissible to the scientific ideas, but can we say that the reaction to those changes, especially in cosmological views or the views of, let's say, scientific paradigms, was an easy transition, a way of adaptation, resistance? How would you describe it?
For most of the people that I'm going to be talking about, they're curious. They're kindred spirits, people who are probably already partly inclined to think the same way and be open to new ideas. There's a kind of reformist philosophy behind some of the folks mentally in terms of their intellectual frameworks that is a little different, already open to new things, not afraid of new things, maybe even a little daring on purpose, but partly that's a personality thing, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree, but I would say that some people, they may have been open to new ideas, but they could have rejected, for instance, the Copernican theory. But for some of them, I mean, they composed treatises, very idiosyncratic treatises. I'm thinking of Liber Froment, for instance, a famous Louvain professor of various disciplines. And he was, when he writes like satirical works refuting the Copernican theory, etc., etc. So they weren't just, retrogrades or something like that. Some of them were ingenious scholars, and yet they were against these new, let's say, ideas. Or I'm thinking also of Riccioli, who composed his major writing, and that's like the most important book of 17th century cosmology. Shall I go on? Just yeah. But I think that, once again, we're talking about some like very, very sophisticated scholars. What happened to the normal people? Well, we don't know.
So once again, Professor Gosin, could you tell us a bit more about how those scientific ideas throughout centuries fueled our worldviews and imagination, cultural imagination?
Yes, so I've been asked to share some ways that astronomical worldviews have been received and constructed within various forms of cultural representation and expression, especially in literature and the visual arts. Until about 100 years ago, our literal cosmic worldview, such as that, was far more personal and universal than it is now. We all used to have more direct visual access to the day and night skies. We knew the sun, moon, and planets and stars so well that we noticed when a comet or a meteor or other unidentified shiny object visited us. But for most of human history, Most astronomical observations have not been done by professionals. Once we all were astronomers and cosmologists, we just had to look up. And we could see that we are here. Many years ago, I saw the Milky Way like this, and I felt as though I might, in fact, fall off the edge of the world right into it. It was so deep and dark and bright. It inspired, in fact, my lifelong interest in amateur astronomy and also in the history of literature and astronomy. Scientifically, we might say that this image also depicts our place in the universe, somewhere on a modest planet, orbiting an average star, out on a minor branch of a barred spiral galaxy, all spinning around in and also hurtling through cosmic space. That is one way to describe it. But there are other ways of observing, recording, investigating, speculating, and representing how and what we learn about the cosmos. This image, for instance, raises all kinds of human responses that are not strictly scientific at all. There's the aesthetic. This scene, in some ways, evokes kind of an involuntary gasp of the sublime, a sense of where sheer beauty meets sheer immensity. And then there's the philosophical, not to mention the psychological and emotional, all those complex thoughts and feelings, awe plus wonder, fear plus doubt, in the face of the vast unknown and deep existential questions such as, what is that? Is it real? Where did it come from? How long has it existed? Where did I come from? How long will I exist? What is the meaning of life, the universe, and everything? What do we as individuals and societies do with such big cosmic questions? Not to mention our shared universal human condition of finding ourselves here in the dark in more ways than one. As the neuroscientist and creative writer David Eagleman is fond of saying, the brain is the universe's ultimate storyteller. How human brains construct our inner universes, our personal models and cosmologies, worldviews, out of our sensory experiences and interactions with the outer cosmos is complex, eclectic, and primarily an unconscious process. But just as we once were all astronomical observers once, so too we once were all poets in the original Greek sense of creators, crafters, composers, order seekers, and meaning makers. Our earliest poetics of science was already present in our earliest forms of storytelling. It was also present in our earliest artistic depictions of nature knowledge. Together, the verbal and the artistic and visual have enabled us to communicate and record information about astronomical observations, imaginative speculations about their meaning, graphic images of the physical appearances of celestial things and their locations, as well as to engage in pattern identification, prediction making, and practical trial and error applications. People all over the world have long used song, poetry, myth, and art to share and preserve astronomical knowledge and cosmological stories. Such artifacts represent a culture's collective understanding of the nature of nature and the relationship of things above to things below. Naturally, such accounts reflect humanity's common sense as produced by our limited sensory experiences of the natural world, and apparently we cannot help but project our mundane attitudes and heroic adventures out onto the universe. We do seem to like a big stage. But we do not just construct verbal and visual representations of astronomy and cosmologies. We also build them into the design of the physical structures we live in and worship in. Human cosmologies shape our abstract social and political structures. As our understanding of nature has grown more complex, so our cosmologies have evolved and changed, often unevenly, circulating first amidst elite learned groups as the majority of humans go on living their lives beneath the skies, doing the work of the world, acting and reacting the best they can to survive. Quite likely, nature philosophy and mathematical astronomy have always primarily been intended for and appreciated by nature philosophers and mathematical astronomers. Yet new discoveries and cosmological concepts have always also become popularized. Astronomical ideas about the heavens have especially mingled with our ideas of heaven and the afterlife. Blended with the spiritual beliefs of all world religions, they have further circulated through many layers of popular culture. In Judeo-Christian tradition, Dante's cosmological poem reflected his sophisticated reception of over 1,000 years of highly Christianized and reified Aristotelian Ptolemaic astronomy. His work later influenced Paradise Lost, in which Milton aimed to justify the ways of God to man with reference to the Creator's architectural plan for the cosmos. Although Milton stopped short of declaring for or against heliocentrism, he directly referenced Galileo's telescopic discoveries, including sunspots, which he associated with Satan's darkness visible. For many centuries, physico-theological poems like this were actually very popular ways to learn about astronomy and cosmology. From the Middle Ages into the 19th century, throughout Asian and Islamic learning centers and European universities, a rich combination of poetic, artistic, astronomical, mathematical, and theological philosophical knowledge mixed and matched in many multidisciplinary minds. During the Industrial Revolution, and especially after World War II, such endeavors became increasingly specialized. In the United States, the two cultures divide between the sciences and humanities has only widened. Math, science, and reading literacy are all down. There are now far fewer eyes and minds well prepared to identify and interpret astronomical references, images, and ideas in poetic, literary, and artistic places. Nevertheless, some have continued to cultivate such approaches. As a mid-century modern person myself, I was influenced by the powerful two cultures resistance of two 20th century Renaissance men. One from Poland you may recognize. As a young person, I was captivated by the Ascent of Man series. Lessons learned from science and human values have never left me, and I still teach them. My second Renaissance man influencer was born in my home state of Nebraska, the center of the United States. An anthropologist, a poet, an historian, and philosopher of science, Lauren Isley was also one of the most profound popular science and nature writers of his era. So as I began my university studies, these two interdisciplinary lives assured me that combining the sciences with humanities was not only possible, but had a remarkable history and perhaps a bright future. In my own graduate work, I completed 2 PhDs simultaneously, one in the history of science and the other in English literature. In my dissertation, I combined these two domains in 3 case studies of the interchange of literary and scientific ideas at key turning points in the history of astronomy: the post-Copernican Keplerian revolution, the Newtonian revolution, and the emergence of 19th century astrophysics. In the first case, I drew upon my own readings of Dunn and Kepler to extend Wilbur Applebaum's early work in the early reception of Keplerian astronomy in England. And I found that Dunn's use of astronomical imagery and metaphor as a metaphysical poet was far more sophisticated than previously credited. Some of his most frequently quoted poetic lines are just as frequently misinterpreted. Typically, they've been read as reflecting the cosmological crisis of the cultural shift from a geocentric to heliocentric worldview. But if we read them in the context of just the very following few lines, we can see, and also with a fuller awareness that Dunn personally knew Kepler, and he knew his new astronomy, we can see how, by drawing upon Kepler's quasi-magnetic idea of an anima motrix, Dunn constructs a complementary metaphor that honors the unifying power of goodness, the vis, virtu, of the young girl, and all, in fact, of the good souls among us, whom this complex poem tries to memorialize. In case 2, I describe how Jonathan Swift challenged Newton and the Newtonians to treat moral philosophy and behavior with as much gravity as his law of universal attraction. In Gulliver's Travels, The Progress of Beauty, and the Bickerstaff Papers, Newton's astronomy, lunar theory, and his thorny relationships with other astronomers such as John Flamsteed are all targeted for satiric critique.
So in the meantime, again, when we're waiting for your presentation to get back, so far we have learned that a lot of that worldview is simply in our mind, as we'd expect, and that we constructed or reconstructed from different pieces of information we perceive. But as we already established, those changes were not perceived in the same way by everybody. But how and who really knew about those new ideas? And how fast were these ideas spread? What helped in the popularization?
So one thing I found is by looking at folks who actually knew each other personally that we never expected. For instance, a lot of folks don't know that Milton actually met Galileo, and that John Dunn and Johannes Kepler met also each other and had already previously known each other's work for over 10 years. So a lot of these networks, these invisible networks that you're talking about, they're just only invisible to us. They weren't invisible to the people living on the ground in real time. So a lot of those things are very real, and those connections are very fruitful.
Yeah, of course, no, it doesn't work. The printing press helped a great deal. That's number one. And the second thing is, of course, the networks. And I mean, we know a lot of good projects about early modern letters, how various scholars communicated with one another, and we understand there was like a melting pot of ideas. But again, it was a large community, let's say, of the Republic of Letters, in the 17th century, but not large enough to affect everyone at every level. So I think we should be, in this regard, pretty cautious when we say that a certain discovery influenced everyone. But I suspect that since the name of Newton has been mentioned several times, and I can go on, I suppose. I think that's one of the kind of patterns of our imagination, that we have kind of superheroes of science. And I think in this regard, the fact that Newton was, as we talked yesterday, he was universally regarded as as the superhero of early modern science, that he endorsed certain ideas, including Copernicanism, etc. It affected a large number of people across the border and throughout Europe. The Jesuit examples are, in this regard, are pretty emblematic.
So just a follow-up on that, could we tell a bit more, because you also mentioned that with terms of politics and, let's say, learned societies, what were their influence on the change of worldviews? And is it still the elite level of thinking about science? Okay. We could wait for a bit later with that question. We suspend it and we get back to your presentation. I hope it works now. Thank you.
Actually, we can use that as a segue because Jonathan Swift was having none of the divine status of Newton. He really wasn't buying it at all and felt that everything that Newton was doing was going to end up just being another system that was going to be replaced in the future by another system. It was just part of the human folly of thinking we could understand anything. So very different kind of perspective for, and also, Jonathan Swift was sitting at Newton's table. So they too had personal interactions and were sometimes responding to each other's personalities more so than what they were writing, right? So the third case, it almost feels like a whole nother century has in fact gone by. We'll start off with the 19th century here. In my third case of Thomas Hardy, he was an avid autodidact, and he totally soaked up 19th century popular astronomy and astrophysics, and he fused it with his understanding of Darwinian theory to create a completely new cosmological evolutionary story for his time period. As he put it, at a time when God is not in his heaven and all is not right with the world. Hardy's works often turn on references that are inspired directly by then current astronomy, from variable and double stars, lunar eclipses, the nebular hypothesis, island universes, to the periodicity of comets and solar physics. He was especially intrigued by the discoveries of all the Herschel family, but especially William's ideas about the developmental life cycle of the cosmos, birth to death, and his concept of cosmic profundity. Since the era of Marjorie Hope Nicholson and her peers, numerous scholars have discovered surprising and intriguing ways that astronomy and cosmology appear in the works of poets, dramatists, novelists, and artists. Studies like these provide rich resources for understanding and tracing the transmission and exchange of astronomical information and their cosmological consequences. Recent analyses by people even in this room give us deeper understanding of what aspects of astronomy caught the literary imaginations of various writers as they incorporated them into their own personal worldviews. And new insights into the transmission of astronomy through visual culture have been contributed by art historians, as well as, perhaps surprisingly, professional astronomers who have turned themselves into celestial sleuths. How human beings change their minds about such things is as complex as the human beings themselves. In recent decades, historians of science even have made some concerted efforts to construct more universal stories and inclusive narratives. The stories we tell about who does astronomy and cosmology and how their contributions have changed our worldviews matter. But popular understanding of astronomy and cosmology have never been primarily found in formal literature, art, or academic scholarship. Usually we find popular interest in popular places, such as science fiction. The whole top row are children of Somnium, and popular science writing, as well as the television and films that are inspired by such texts. Popularizations of astronomy can also be found in quite unexpected places. For instance, Astronomy is even once again popular with poets and their audiences. Also, evidence for cross-cultural transmission of post-Copernican ideas even appears in Japanese animation and manga, graphic novels, and children's literature. This particular set of works by Kenji Miyazawa actually begins with an astronomy lesson taken directly from William Herschel, his first graphic depictions of the Milky Way. So today, in our world, social media push astronomy and cosmology directly out to millions of followers. Access to high-res visualizations is not our problem. Of greater concern by far is the fact that every year, fewer living beings on this planet, human and non-human, can have the experience of looking up into truly dark skies. We find ourselves now at a different kind of astronomical and cosmological crossroad. Currently, over 85% of the world's population can no longer see the Milky Way or a night sky filled with stars. In Dallas, where I teach the history of astronomy and cosmology, my students struggle to find the moon and see the sunrise and sunset from our campus. Today, young children all over the world are more likely to look up and see stars like these. Our worldview is undergoing critical change. What will it mean for our cosmological understanding of astronomy and our sense of place in the universe if we lose direct sight of the night sky? What if our future views of the heavens are entirely mediated by cultural representations and scientific visualizations? If any experience deserves to be universal, it should be looking up and out into the universe. What might it mean for the development of our human brains and imaginations? And how might it change who we are and who we can be as individuals, societies, and as a species if no one on this planet can see a star to wish upon? How we write our future cosmological stories is up to us, and to do so, we will need to keep sharing universal experiences. So in the spirit of getting that party started, you are all warmly invited to come join us in Dallas next spring for the total solar eclipse. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. It's been very inspiring. So I really love this ending with the universe being universal experience. Although today with your references to, of course, North America, we are not only in this European perspective, and we crossed from early 16th century to contemporary views on stars and the sciences of the heavens. And you've been trying to, I think, show us in a very elegant and beautiful way that this transition was somehow linear from 15th century, from what Professor Akopian was saying. But was it really linear? We know that the worldviews coexisted. Why did they coexist? Professor Akopian, maybe you could comment on that.
I don't think any development is linear per se. So, I didn't say a word about Tycho, for instance, and the Tychonian system. So I think here you have, in general, you have competing ideas of the universe, and depending on what you prefer for your, if you're a scientist, of course, you should verify your results, etc., etc. But I wouldn't say that, for instance, astrology is on the move right now. Many people, I told some people yesterday that I was very surprised that many people in the 21st century working in the field strongly believe in astrology, so they're professional astrologers. And when they ask me whether I believe in astrology, I say, of course not. They are very, very disappointed by my response. So even in the 21st century, such a superstition exists. So I think in this regard, we sometimes create the universes that that fit our own whatever this is, our expectations from the universe, yes, or our needs. Yeah, and I think the example of astrology is telling.
Yes, I see a very similar thing. I teach at a very international university where almost half of our students are from countries other than the United States. So right now, while I'm teaching students who are in training to be future science and mathematics teachers, I actually have a greater percentage of them now also believing in astrology and, for instance, waiting for the matchmakers in their family culture to decide when they should get married and exactly what particular time of day they should become engaged and when the wedding ceremony should occur and whether or not it will be auspicious. And that is just part of their culture, their family culture, and they're trying very hard to blend, you know, a very 21st century future as a science teacher with their cultural past. So it's a very difficult task, and I think a very eclectic and personal one for most people to figure out a way to bring together all those competing thoughts, feelings, beliefs, what to believe as fact versus fiction, and also how to relieve one's own personal anxieties about all the various crises we're in.
And also in yesterday's panel, some of those things were expressed, and some of those concerns also about those two paths of scientific progress and, let's say, popular belief. But could we end this part with trying to find some answers to the questions, what other factors besides science actually influence our worldview? Professor Akopian, maybe first.
I think trust. I think there are things that we can trust a particular person or particular institution, for instance, but depending on who we trust, or in whom we trust, in God we trust. It really affects the rest of our worldview. I think, like for instance, with our beloved pandemic, in some countries people trust their government, hence they get vaccinated. Right, that's the simplest example. In some countries they don't trust their government and they don't want to do anything that the government orders them to do. So just in order to piss off the government. And in some countries, of course, there is also the, let's say, the economic or socio-economic component to even to that particular example. In some countries, people don't have anything for free. Finally, they got something for free, and they trust their government. Then they run to get vaccinated. So I think
political authorities,
political or personal, you can trust a particular, like, influential person. I don't know, not necessarily a political actor, a scientist, a writer, whoever this
experts,
is. Yes,
and whoever
experts.
We trust.
Yes,
this notion of trust. Pamela?
I totally agree with that. I think in my own experience with watching my students struggle with these kinds of things, they start with their core group of family around them, their friends around them. That's who they listen to first, and then they basically stay in a little bubble. As we see with social media, they hardly ever hear things that are outside of that bubble. It becomes a big struggle for them to come into a class where we basically teach them that the history of science teaches us that we know nothing. And they expect that there will be some authority that we will definitively tell them what's right, what's wrong, right? What is the answer? And I think it's been worse in the last 5 to 6 semesters of COVID teaching, where many of our students have not even been present in the same room, that there's a lot more fear. And so they're even more afraid to venture new ideas, to question ideas, which is exactly the process they need to go through to come up with their new own personal cosmologies.
I also think that in this regard, nothing has changed since antiquity, right? Because Aristotle is still with us.
Aristotle is still with us. I think it's a good stopping point to take some questions from the audience. Right. Let's see first. I think I have to move with the microphone.
Thank you very much. Absolutely fascinating discussion, and in a way puts in the context, historical context, my struggles of the past few years with all dogmas or goodness know what else. So we could certainly, and extend these problems with beliefs which are kind of circling and even more. But, thank you very much, particularly Pamela, for this beautiful poetic description. That this was really, like, I was planning to do some going through the emails, but I stopped doing this and listened. But more pragmatic question about the issue of the light. I read quite a lot about the problem of cities, particularly having too much light, and it's not only depriving us from the view of the night sky, but also has an impact on absolutely everything else and the ecology and so on. So there have been attempts, as I understand, to make the cities less bright during the night. Is this something you think is going to happen, or is this something which we can influence, or what to do about this? Thanks.
I was hoping you would ask that question. After I heard your talk yesterday, I thought we were maybe kindred spirits already. I totally agree with you. Yes, the idea of the dark sky has aesthetic and philosophical and even poetical ramifications, of course, but it's also affecting the health of every living thing on this planet. And if you're interested in that kind of information, I would definitely recommend darksky.org. The International Dark Skies Organization is working very hard all over the world, from Thailand to Alaska to everywhere in between, to establish dark sky preserves, but also to educate community leaders, work with industry to reduce the kind of light that's being used, to make sure that we're directing light only where it's needed, not out into the atmosphere. So we're not only just not interfering with our things visually. I don't need any of it, don't worry. Thank you. Thanks so much. There's no space. And also to deal with the health issues, not just for humans, but for non-humans. When I teach this kind of information at school, I use a very terrifying image of Las Vegas, Nevada, which is totally an anti-natural environment where that is so fully lit down below that there is nothing visible above. And every single year, every single night, it kills thousands of birds who are trying to migrate through those giant streams of light. So we know that it's a huge issue that we can't, but that we can affect directly in real time. Many cities are making very slight changes, which economically give them a cheaper lighting budget, but then also affect positively the health of their citizens. So thank you for that.
Proszę, profesor Jana, w międzyczasie prosiłabym jeszcze na chwilkę o ostatnią prezentację, obsługę techniczną.
Dobrze. I think these two talks are very related, and the questions also about what happened that astrology was rejected, and about poets and poetic writings. Because in my opinion, I would like to ask you if you agree, or if you have some other ideas. We have to think that the worldview in the ancient times, especially in the medieval time and Renaissance, was one whole. And you have, for example, to complete visible forces with occult forces. And astrology was an expression of believing in occult forces as the same as magic. So when you have new physics and new dynamics, you don't need occult forces. So you don't need astrology, you don't need magic. The same can be related also to poetics, because for the whole Middle Ages, poets were the very granted source of knowledge. They were not just poets like to make expression of our emotions. It was much more. It was science, but in involucrum, fabula, in something that is hidden, and you have to go down to in the bottom to find the real truth. So, do you agree with it, or you have some other explanation?
Thank you very much. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I would say that there were, of course, some exceptions in antiquity. In particular, we have Lucretius, and that's a completely different story. But in general, yes, of course, the heavenly world was connected to the terrestrial world, and astrology was seen as one of the most obvious means to connect those two things. Yet there were other things like alchemy remained at some point a respected field. So I think the paths for the rejection of the two disciplines were kind of different. I think here we have also the example of, again, Newton endorsed alchemy, not astrology, and that of course affected the validity of astrology in the eyes of his contemporaries. But at the same time, we have people like Alexander von Humboldt, who in the Cosmos says exactly the same thing, that we have the interconnection between the two worlds, but astrology is excluded from that equation. So I think the idea that there is some sort of harmony, right, that's the word, exists regardless of the presence of astrology or other occult disciplines. So probably that's just what people tend to believe in general. Yeah, but even in the learned, community, you have Alexander von Humboldt wasn't a simpleton, right? So you have the same idea present in both among the learned people and the, let's say, I hate this term, the common people, but the broader audience, let's say.
Yes, and I very much appreciate your understanding of the poetics not just being about emotion or about expression of beauty, but really about trying to find a hidden meaning and hidden connections, which is like, Bronowski's idea about the fusion of hidden likenesses, right? That is the essential creative act, both sciences and in the humanities. And I think all of our poets have tried to do that over the years. But also I see it now present. I currently live in the state of Oklahoma, which is home to 39 different indigenous tribes. And a lot of my colleagues there in the various indigenous tribes are very interested in this concept of how things above relate to things below. And they see the microcosm and the macrocosm as united, but through these kinds of signs and symbols and influences that we often label astrological.
Do we have any more questions from the room? So perhaps if I could make a comment, that's with the presentation, about how the poetics influenced also scientific investigation at some point in the 17th century. That's my favorite example from Robert Hooke's Micrographia. In his description of the ant, probably the image of the flea is more popular, but he was trying to find the best method to immobilize the insect, to view it under the microscope. And he said, well, I cannot glue it because it distorts the image. I cannot kill it because it distorts the structure of the body. So he drank the ant, and he put the ant into wine, and in this way, intoxicated animal couldn't move. And then he says, and could see, of course, and delineated in the way you can see on the left. And then he says, and thus I dealt with this ant, which I have here delineated, which was one of the many, of a very large kind, that inhabited under the roots of a tree, from whence they would sally out in great parties and make most grievous havoc of the flowers and fruits in the ambient garden, and return back again very expertly by the same ways and the paths they went. So I think that's this two-way, let's say, route of science and poetics that permitted the early modern imagination, and also, as you have brilliantly showed, a bit later on toward our worldviews. And I think a good way to finish this panel is with the quotation from the professor of this university, Władysław Nathanson, who was a physicist, a dean of the Jagiellonian University at the time, also a philosopher of science, popularizer of science, who hardly ever started a talk without a reference to Shakespeare. And in one of his books, which, oh, sorry, I just destroyed the presentation. No, sorry. One of his books, The Horizon of Science, he refers to what we have in the title of today's topic. That means whether the science moves in evolutionary manner or not. And I think it would be a good segue to the next session of today's debates. And this is in my translation. Moving forward in evolution or circulating in an endless circle. Both suppositions lose their simplicity, lose their meaning if there is no universal time or a total, all-inclusive space. If for each event one must create a different time and a separate space, the world today does not seem like a whole. Rather, it appears as a muddle, where everything is in disarray. However, a thought recoils from consenting to the ocean of coincidence. It flinches in the face of the specter of the blind night, of chance, and the unfathomable anarchy of relationshiplessness. Let us thank our speakers.